Welcome back.
Tonight we have a special edition looking over the peace and prosperity of the past decade.
Let's start with sports.
Hello, listeners. I'm broadcasting live from inside the walls of Yankee Stadium. Today is truly special as it is the opening night of America's favorite pastime, baseball. Let's take a look back at previous seasons from earlier in the decade. Spectators from around the country are lining up outside waiting to enter the stadium. Radio hosts and journalists are also setting up to document all the incredible athletes tonight and give their listeners only the best in near-life sports entertainment. It's remarkable to believe that sports have come so far since the beginning of the decade. These events have soared as a favorite activity for most Americans ever since radio hosts, like myself, started airing these games nationwide. Today holds another special treat. It's Veterans Night tonight to honor our brave soldiers who gave their lives for our country and for those who are fortunate enough to make it back home. Our servicemen are joining us tonight to celebrate the joys of baseball and escape the memories of war. Stay tuned for interviews with our heroes later tonight. Another hero with us tonight is the famous athlete Babe Ruth. For those of you who don't know, he is number 3 and the pitcher for our home team at tonight's game. We are all excited to see what Babe Ruth brings to the plate tonight, so sit back, grab your peanuts and Cracker Jacks, and enjoy the game.
Thank you for that. Now for a short segment on the 1920s presidents.
Hello. There were 3 presidents throughout the Roaring Twenties. The first one was Warren G. Harding, as I'm sure you all remember. His running platform was entitled A Return to Normalcy, which helped our nation recover and prosper after the First World War ended. It focused on moving on and forgetting about the terrible events that unfolded throughout World War I. He was involved in the Teapot Dome scandal, which involved the improper use of federal land, and this greatly tarnished his reputation as president. He served from 1921 until his untimely death in 1923. After his death, his vice president, Calvin Coolidge, was elected. Coolidge is a quiet man who was an extremely effective leader. He is a fan of small government and a major Republican advocate for laissez-faire policies which limit government interaction with business. He is a surprising supporter of racial equality. When he finally left office in 1929, he did so without a single scandal or issue, making him one of the most popular presidents of our time period. Our final president, and our current president, as I hope you all know, is Herbert Hoover. He is certainly going to finish out this decade with a bang. He is also a great leader who believes that the role of an individual in society and the economy are very important things. He also bravely asserts that our government is tremendously inefficient, and would be able to run much more effectively under his tenure as president. We are certainly in for an interesting next couple of years under Hoover. This was an interesting and brief look of our presidents of the past decade.
That's great. Now for a recap of the decade's fashion.
The fashion of the era was a reflection of the people's liberated and luxurious minds. Fashion for us women has dramatically changed over the course of the year because of our changing roles in modern society. Because us women have gained more freedom from conservative ideas, the clothing worn was typically more open and close-fitting. Another factor for this extravagant change was the booming of the stock market after World War I and the optimism that came along with it. And now let us take a look at the trends I've picked up from this previous decade. As you can see here, women wore low-waisted dresses, heels, statement jewelry, and had their hair up in a short bob. Typically, the more luxurious you are, the more money you have. Trending fashion designers like Gabrielle Coco Chanel, Norman Hartwell, and Hilda Stewart became very popular during our decade. As for men, they also abandoned formal attire and began to wear athletic clothing. Suspenders became very popular this past decade and was paired with some knickers and a light-colored shirt. Bow ties and pocket watches also made their way into the 1920s for men. Both genders embraced clothing styles that enhanced youthful appearances. Thank you for tuning in with us for this fashion segment, and we'll hope to see you tomorrow.
And now for a segment about organized crime and prohibition of the 1920s.
Hello again. Throughout the Progressive Era, there are many abhorrent issues that our society face. One of these, as I'm sure you remember, is alcohol. Many women and children have campaigned relentlessly for the ban of alcohol, otherwise known as the temperance movement. They believe that this would lead to a better domestic landscape, as fathers and husbands will be less abusive toward their family and spend less money. This finally came into fruition in 1920 through the passing of the 18th Amendment, otherwise known as Prohibition, which I'm sure you all remember because it was a landmark legislative event. However, this has led to an immeasurable increase in organized crime as people still want to drink alcohol. The most prominent supplier of this alcohol is gangster Al Capone. For the past several years, his smuggling ring has been collecting revenue in the neighborhood of hundreds of thousands of dollars through the illegal sale of alcohol. His mobs, and other mobs like it, are very dangerous organizations to be involved in. The homicide rate in Chicago, unsurprisingly, has risen dramatically throughout this time. I caution all the viewers out there that if you witness any suspicious activity, simply do not get involved. Alert the appropriate authorities and move on with your day. Due to the lack of federal regulation, this liquor that his ring and other mobs like his ring produce are often very detrimental to the health of the consumer. So do not drink any of this alcohol because first, it's illegal, and second, it might just kill you if the gangsters don't do it first. And all of these issues begin to beg the question, is prohibition actually helping or hurting our nation? And I will leave that to all of you people at home. Fascinating. And now on to a brief report about the automobile and its effects.
Americans dominated the automobile industry in the first half of the 20th century. Henry Ford innovated mass production techniques that became standard, with Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler emerging as the big three auto companies in the 1920s. The Model T sold for $490 in 1914, about 1/4 of the cost of the previous decade. By 1920, there were over 8 million registrations for these cars. The 1920s saw tremendous growth in automobile ownership, with the number of registered drivers almost tripling to 23 million by the end of the decade. The automobile resulted in more pollution, chaos, and traffic jams for the first time in history, as well as more traffic incidents and fatalities. Despite the drawbacks, Americans loved their cars. As more and more were purchased, drivers saw their world grow much larger. Freedom of choice encouraged many family vacations. Urban dwellers had the opportunity to rediscover pristine landscapes, just as rural dwellers were able to shop in towns and cities. Teenagers also gained more and more independence with driving freedom. And of course, let's take a look at the decade's entertainment and music.
And now let us take a look at the music and entertainment segment. This decade had some major advances in the music and entertainment industry. The 1920s was also known as the Jazz Age because of the popularity and the demand of this genre of music. Louis Armstrong is an example of one of the most influential jazz singers at this time. The 1920s is known for the upbeat and rhythmic music. Instruments like the trumpet, saxophone, drums, and piano were sure to get the audience up on their feet and dancing. Movies emerged during this decade and became the most popular form of public entertainment. Some big movie studios during our time are the Warner Bros., Paramount, and Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. Movies like The Temptress and The Phantom of the Opera impacted many of the social behaviors and relationships between people, as well as actors like Charlie Chaplin. As our nation continues to prosper, the music and entertainment industry will not only keep growing, but will also keep improving to satisfy the demands from the people. Thank you for watching the music and entertainment segment of this show, and we hope to see you tomorrow.
That's very entertaining. And now on to a brief segment about the feminist movement.
At first, male politicians moved aggressively to gain the women's vote, passing legislation guaranteeing women's rights. Congress also passed legislation to set up a national system of women's and infants' health care clinics, as well as a constitutional amendment prohibiting child labor, a measure that was supported by many women's groups. However, this momentum slowed down. The major issue that split feminists during the 1920s was a proposed equal rights amendment to the Constitution outlawing discrimination based on sex. The issue pitted the interests of professional women against those of working-class women, many of whom feared the amendment would prohibit protective legislation that stipulated minimum wages and maximum hours for female workers. In the 1920s, flappers represented a new type of feminism. They possessed different goals and methods than feminists of the early 20th century. During the 1920s, middle-upper-class women were no longer as concerned with political equality, but rather these new feminists desired social equality. Women had the right to enjoy themselves socially as much as men did, whether through drinking, sex, or indulging in the pleasures of urban nightlife and smoking. Now, let's take a glance back at the Harlem Renaissance.
Today I'm here to discuss with you the hot topic about the Harlem Renaissance, change our cultural views. Who would have known that events such as the Great Migration would lead to a cultural reawakening in the Harlem Renaissance? As we have seen, the African American community has really established its voice in our society over the decade. Figures such as Duke Ellington, Louis Armstrong, and Billie Holiday have led the way for change through literature, art, dramas, and music. There are so many different views of the American culture seen through the eyes of these artists through their works. Some people believe that these people associated with the Harlem Renaissance are radicals. However, these artists are simply shedding a much-needed light that hadn't been presented earlier in the decades. Besides, the African American community isn't the only ones who are getting down with this new trend. It's about time our country reevaluate what we consider socially correct and what is morally correct. Previously, many believed that anyone in a minority group, much less a woman, could ever amount to success of a white male. But activists like Zora Neale Hurston and Langston Hughes have proven them wrong. This unique form of expression is a way to showcase each individual's talent while distinguishing themselves from the prevalent white culture. The Harlem Renaissance has caused dramatic changes in America's social views in only a few short years, and I'm excited to see what the new decade has in store for us.
Food for thought. And now on to a brief segment about the debate between modernism versus fundamentalism and the Scopes trial.
Hello. Now on to modernism versus fundamentalism. The modernism versus fundamentalism is a religious controversy within the Presbyterian Church in the United States of America. Underneath those struggles lay profound concerns about the role of Christianity in the culture and how the role is being expressed. Fundamentalist Christians, stressing literal biblical interpretations, oppose any scientific teachings that cast doubt on the veracity of Scripture. On the other hand, modernist Christians, mainly urban, are attempting to adapt religion to the teachings of modern science and a changing world. For instance, in Dayton, Tennessee, the Scopes trial is becoming national news. John Scopes, a science teacher, has violated Tennessee's Butler Act, which prohibits the teaching of evolution in Tennessee schools. The famous monkey trial is pitting creationism against Darwin's theory of evolution. In addition, this trial is representing the clash between science and fundamental religion in rural and urban Americans. William Jennings Bryan is assisting in prosecution while Clarence Darrow is defending Scopes. Ultimately, Scopes is found guilty and fined at $100. At the end, he quit his teaching job, left town, and went to study at the University of Chicago.
And finally, a brief segment about the first Red Scare.
Now on to the Red Scare. After World War II, the Red Scare has taken place in the U.S. due to the Communist Revolution in Russia. Therefore, the nation is becoming very fearful that communism might spread to the U.S. Workers who avoided striking during the war are now demanding increased wages to keep pace with the spiraling inflation. After a series of bombing, President Wilson's attorney, General A. Mitchell Palmer, has determined that no Bolshevik revolution would happen in the United States. However, immigrants are being blamed for the destruction, the chaos, and the violence. As a result, Palmer is conducting a series of raids known as the Palmer Raid on individuals he believes are dangerous to American security. He is targeting people's homes and business in order to determine their loyalty to the government. In addition, there is a high increase of fear in foreigners and the rise of nativists, Ku Klux Klan. As the Red Scare is intensifying, Americans are feeling the effects of the Red Scare on a personal level, and thousands of alleged communist sympathizers are seeing their lives disrupted. They are being hounded by law enforcement, alienated from friends and families, and fired from their jobs. For example, the Hollywood blacklist. It is becoming a practice of denying employment to screenwriters, actors, directors, musicians, and other U.S. entertainment professionals because of their suspected political beliefs or accusations. Now, in this program, we would like to present a product from Chanel, the Coco Mademoiselle perfume from Paris.
We hope you enjoyed tonight's special edition on the news.